our first panel, which is Bobby Lee, Susan Joseph, Tone Vays, and Chris Betz. So while they're getting settled, talk part of in front of the podium. Thanks for coming today, everyone. My name is Susan Poole, and I'm with, I founded a company very recently, so with the profitability, whatever the question was, I didn't raise my hand. Formerly, I was with an organization that's pretty relevant in this space that you may have heard of. I was Director of Development for the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and it's the trade association for the digital assets industry based out of Washington, D.C. In that role for the past year, I was quite fortunate to meet a lot of the speakers and some of you that are here attending today. And I have to say this is quite the journey. I've been in the space since 2014. Literally, I was invited to a Bitcoin event, and as many of you know, Bitcoin sits on top of the blockchain technology. So I was invited to this event in 2014, and I had this revelation. So in my career in IT, all I could think of was internet, oh, and then I saw Google, oh, and then I saw Facebook, and then I saw blockchain, and I went, oh. And the great news is because we are right here. And all of you in the room today, you're right here, right? And it's going to go there, like those other technologies did. So I really applaud everyone for taking time out of your day and being here in this new technology. Although it's been around a couple of years and even longer on the Bitcoin side, it's a very promising technology. We've got some fantastic speakers, real leaders in the industry that have come together today. And I've found that many people that are involved in the industry are very supportive of other people coming on board and expanding the knowledge base. So with that, today, we are going to talk about the state of the industry. We've got an incredibly diverse and interesting panel, and I'm going to introduce each one of them to you now. And then after I introduce the panel, I'll start asking them some questions about the state of the industry. So first up, we have Bobby Lee. Bobby is from Shanghai. And Bobby is the CEO and founder of BTCC. Now, that was formerly known as BTC China. And BTCC is one of the largest, highly regarded Bitcoin mining companies in the world. And Bobby can tell you a bit more about what they're also doing now. Within the Bitcoin mining community, it's quite a broad worldwide reach, and Bobby is really known, and I can say this from personal experience, as a real leader in this space, someone who brings these entities together. Prior to getting into the world of Bitcoin and blockchain, Bobby was an executive for Walmart in China, and he also came from eBay and Yahoo. So I'm going to welcome Bobby Lee.
Thank you.
Next on the panel, we have a New Yorker, Susan Joseph. Susan is the founder of Women in Fintech, as well as a new entity called SheTech Power that she can tell you a bit about. Susan had a really interesting event here. She was the CEO of ID 2020, which was held recently at the United Nations. And Susan was able to bring together a very powerful group of people from across the world, really focusing on the identity challenge. The great news about it for everyone in the room is that Susan and her team were able to bring people from the blockchain industry and community into this event. And so a whole bunch of people that are really committed and passionate about social change with people having identities were introduced to possible blockchain solutions. So we welcome Susan as well. Next, we have Chris Betz. Chris is a senior advisor to the EDM Council, and he's going to tell us a bit more about what that is. But when I found out, I realized that there's a lot of power in that EDM Council related to blockchain. So Chris is their senior advisor for all things blockchain. Chris has an extensive background on Wall Street and in finance. And Chris was a co-founder of a startup called Noble Markets, which is still around today. That was one of the very first startups in this space for clearing and settlement. And then we have Tone Vays. So, oh, sorry, Chris. The first presentation I ever saw in this space was a workshop by Tone Vays. So Tone, you must have done something right, because 2 years later, and I'm still here. So Tone comes from a background on Wall Street. He was a VP at JP Morgan and also worked with Bear Stearns. Prior to what he's doing now at Liberty Life Trail, his own organization, he was the head researcher for Brave New Coin, which is a publication in this space. Tone has a bright mind and analytical ability to analyze and retain a lot of information, and certainly we don't have a shortage of that here. So let's welcome Tone. Okay. So I'm going to start off with Bobby. So Bobby, from your perspective, you've been in this industry quite a while. You've seen so many changes. You've seen it be everything Bitcoin, and then you've seen people learn about the blockchain technology that sits underneath Bitcoin, and now it's digital currency, it's smart contracts, it's everything in between. So from your unique perspective, Bobby, tell us about the state of the industry and a little bit more about what you're doing.
Yes, so Bitcoin's been around for what I would say 8 years now. We're in the 8th year of Bitcoin since early 2009. And a lot has happened. For the first few years, no one really paid attention. Probably only a handful of people got involved. I wasn't aware of it at all until 2011. And then the next few years, enthusiasts got involved. And then recently, in 2013, that was a big coming out year for Bitcoin. And then, of course, with the subsequent, the Mt. Gox situation in 2014, there was a sort of a winter cooling off period. And that's when blockchain came about. So I presume most of you in the audience, by the name of the conference, we're all here and care about blockchain. And that effort really has only started in the last 2 years, I would say, since late 2014, 2015. So the industry is still, I think the industry is still finding itself in terms of on one hand, people say, oh, blockchain and Bitcoin are two separate things. How many of you here think that blockchain and Bitcoin are two separate things? Yeah, but I think, yeah, that's great. That's what I expected by the name of this conference. Now, I actually want to challenge this conventional wisdom, because I've been scratching my head over the last 3.5 years and really asked myself, how can blockchain and Bitcoin be separated? So to summarize, I find it hard to really separate blockchain from Bitcoin. I can talk more about that in this panel, but essentially it comes down to, with a global blockchain, by definition, we want a global blockchain, and we have a distributed ledger, and then we therefore want the system to be decentralized, right? How many of you believe that for blockchain to be valuable, it has to be decentralized? So I think that's by definition, at least I presume that. Now the question then is, if blockchain is truly global and decentralized, what happens to the data and the tokens on the blockchain? It would have to be independent and have no recourse. So this is where it gets tricky. How do you really separate out the tokens on the blockchain, such as Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, and the data on it, and without it being centrally controlled or arranged by any sort of company or organization? So it's a technical discussion. If you guys are curious, I can share more details. But essentially, in terms of state of the industry, I think this year, the last 2 years, there's been a lot of hype about blockchain. I think blockchain is great. But what I don't believe myself yet, maybe some of you can convince me, is how can we have great blockchain without a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin? So that's the question I bring to the audience today.
Well, thank you, Bobby. And certainly there's a lot of opinions and views and insights that we're all going to talk about today. So let's stay tuned, and thank you for bringing all of that up. Next, I'm going to go to Tone Vays. So Tone, as a very strong researcher, and actually you're quite the worldwide speaker. I think you're invited to speak at events all over the world. and therefore you get such a unique understanding of what people are talking about and what the state of the industry is. So from your perspective, tell us about the state of the industry and a bit what you're focusing on now.
Lately, I've actually been dealing with the same issues that Bobby just raised. How do you show up at a new venue and try to explain the concept of a blockchain and Bitcoin? Everyone pretty much understands what Bitcoin is. Once they looked into it, it's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to the word blockchain, you ask 5 different people and you will get 5 different definitions and 5 different examples. And I have been taking a stand lately trying to be very specific about my definition of a blockchain and lately what I've been saying is I did not just quit Wall Street, give up a nice salary for a new type of database. Right? I did it for something a little
Gloves are off. Okay.
a little more innovative than that. And to me,
Oracle is hiring.
right. And so to me, what Satoshi Nakamoto brought to the world was this proof of work algorithm that allows it to kind of reach this consensus that is immutable, and it's value transfer across the internet that is uncensorable. Now, that is useful in some cases, and that is not useful in other cases. In order for him to achieve that, he needed a digital token to move through that system, which happened to be Bitcoin. And I do believe that there will only be one of these public blockchains. I'm hoping that it's Bitcoin because some of us are invested in Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin, but the way it works is because of the electricity and the proof of work. To me, that is the innovation that I'm trying to promote. And its use cases revolve from the fact that it's a censorship-resistant means of value transfer. And I really recently I've been preferring traveling to third world countries. I was recently in Ukraine and Morocco, Vietnam, Thailand. And I find that they have a different view on money and cash than areas like Europe and the US, where we all use the credit cards. We don't have problems paying for things in this country. But when you travel to third world country, everyone is cash. To them, Bitcoin might actually make more sense as they leap into the digital technology and bypass the physical banking system for digital payments.
Okay, thank you, Tone. You certainly have a global perspective there. And now we're going to go to our, I'd say, blockchain-focused panelists. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you. So, Chris, with your finance background, you did a startup in this space, combining this technology with clearing and settlement. You are literally in the world of banking and finance, being the blockchain guy for the EDM Council. Can you tell us what the EDM Council is? And what's the state of the industry? What are you talking to bankers and people from that industry? What are you saying about blockchain today?
So the EDM Council was formed about 6 or 7 years ago in response to the flood of new regulatory requirements that were foisted on the banks, Dodd-Frank, Volcker, BCBS. And the organization was formed to create data best practices and standards around data governance. The organization is comprised of about 200 different Wall Street firms, buy-side, sell-side, vendors, exchanges. About 3 or 4 years ago, they started creating something called FIBO, the Financial Information Business Ontology. And what FIBO is, it's a semantic framework to define financial contracts. Everything from equities, swaps, bonds, loans, commercial paper, as well as identity. So these guys have been, for the last 5 or 6 years, building this framework, and it's obviously very powerful when they all get onto the same ontologies, the same vocabularies, so that they can more efficiently move information back and forth. Now, I have to say the disclaimer here, I don't represent, in my opinion here, the EDM Council, because there's such a broad diversity of opinion about definitional terms like blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, cyber assets, et cetera, ad infinitum. This is a new realm for them. The audience that makes up the EDM Council is generally chief architects, chief technology officers at the most senior levels at these different organizations. They're very, very interested. About 80 to 85% of the board of directors of the EDM Council all have Bitcoin or blockchain labs, venture capital investments in the domain. They're all part of R3. They're all working with DAH. They're all working within Hyperledger. So they're very well aware. The difference, however, being that the production folks, the people who are maintaining and using the systems day in and day out, are not deeply involved in the domain yet. When I go out to the EDM Council and do presentation on blockchain, I always ask the question, how many of you have direct budgetary authority or are deeply involved with a blockchain initiative? And you'll get 5 out of 300 people raising their hands. So it gives you an idea of where we are. They're all situationally aware, but from a prioritization point of view, they're interested in keeping their current platforms up and running, making sure that they meet all the compliance rules so that they don't get another $3, $4, $5 billion fine, and keeping everything locked down from a security point of view. And then finally, meeting the new requirements from regulations, which are still coming. You have things like consolidated audit trail requirements coming up from the SEC. You have MiFID over in Europe about unbundling research and research commissions as well as transaction reporting. So there's still, the regulators still aren't done. And I think that the position right now is a defensive position, but a great deal of interest from what I can see in the conversations that I've had right now. And then finally, you can't look at blockchain in the absence of all the other technologies that are arriving and all the other technologies that these firms have developed. So most of these firms, the larger firms, have just gotten themselves up and running on SOA architectures. But you also have microservices coming in. You have machine learning coming in. You have all these semantic frameworks coming in. So there's a lot going on with these organizations, a tremendous amount of new technology that are clearly going to change the waterfront, but these folks are getting paid to make sure that nothing blows up. That's their first order of priority. Protect their customers, make sure they're compliant, make sure they're meeting all the regulatory standards, and making sure that they can make money on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, great perspective. Thank you, Chris. Next, we're going to speak with Susan Josephs. Susan, you pulled together this Identity 2020 Summit at the UN. You're also involved with getting women in Fintech involved. And what do you see the potential for blockchain related to what you're working on? And actually, what would you say it is today?
So I look at this from a number of perspectives, and I have a startup NGO called She Tech Power, which is it's organized under creating inclusion for women through technology with a focus in part on blockchain. And there's 2 areas. So leadership and participation in actually working in the tech industry, because we know that women are in general underrepresented. We also know from Davos that gender equality is, through McKinsey's statistic, a $28 trillion opportunity, which should be a number that makes anybody sit up. We also know that women represent about 9% of the blockchain Bitcoin industry in varying spots, and it's a huge opportunity, economic and humanitarian, to do something. So that's on the sort of worker side. On the application side, there are a couple of things that at least I'm starting to focus on that came out of ID 2020 for me. And financial inclusion would be one, which you obviously can't have that without identity, and identity likely on the blockchain is a pretty good solution, at least to start looking at that. So you look at a fifth of the world that doesn't have identity, and there's an opportunity right there. If you can end up providing identity to all of them, the last mile, then you can end up with financial inclusion. You can end up with a bigger economic pie. And the reason why I take this on is because a large part of the unreached in general are women. Women do not have the same access to cell phones in emerging markets. And you can't have a digital identity and act on it if you don't have a tool and you don't have training. So that is one area to look at. When I've put this under sort of blockchain for good, but it's also do good, do well. Because if you're a carrier and you hand a cell phone to somebody and you give it out as a freemium, you end up being able to pile services on there and bring the person economically into the community. So good for all. The second area that I look at, which seems to be a pretty interesting global conversation, is supply chain. And that is because 70% of all trafficked workers are women and involved in modern day slavery. And in my mind, if you can trace that person all the way through and know who their identity is, you can verify that they are not slaves. You can then also, through blockchain, track all of your hard goods going through and end up reducing fraud, enabling better financing terms overall, and increasing the economic reach of the supply chain. So again, a do good, do well. So that's where my things that came out of ID 2020 were for me as direct applications of things that could be done. And I will tell you that there is a project at the UN that was kicked off either 2 or 3 weeks ago called the Dignity Project, which involves supply chain, creating clean supply chains, attestations that there is no slavery, social awareness. But in and amongst that solution, I did not see any mention of a technology or potential technology that could help solve things. And so one of my goals is to bring that to the forefront. So that's kind of where I stand. I'll just briefly tell you that the Women in Fintech group that I run is a LinkedIn networking group, which ended up, it's 14 months old, has 1,200 plus members as of last night in 47 countries. I initially posted content on blockchain there and use it as a blockchain, AI, et cetera, all of the developments, machine learning going on. And it is a really, we get maybe 10, 12 articles posted a day on this area. And, you know, I personally have spoken through LinkedIn to a lot of people who are members. So I can tell you that I've talked to the woman from Botswana who's trying to create financial inclusion using Bitcoin and trying to get something better within a very poor economic environment. And I've talked to regulators, and I mean, so it gets a broad variety, academics, et cetera. And 30% of the people in that group are men, so I encourage you all to join the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'm going to ask each panelist one more question because we definitely want to open it up to the audience. I just want to say thanks again to our panel. I mean, we've got two people, Bobby and Tone, very long in the space, started obviously with Bitcoin, and we've got Susan and Chris, different backgrounds coming to the space, working with blockchain. I think it's really important to have all these views as we kick off our day. 2 years ago, when I went to an event, every event was a Bitcoin conference. And I scratch my head and think, now, when did we start talking about blockchain? I don't really remember. But I'd like to go to Bobby next. So Bobby, there's a lot of talk in the financial world. There's private blockchains. There's a large consortium called R3. Over 43 banks have signed up. They're developing technology. It's open technology, but it's not a public blockchain, cryptocurrency, digital assets like Bitcoin. So I would just love to have you share your views. You've been in this such a long time.
Yeah, so this is great. So R3, I think a lot of people are aware of R3 and private blockchains and so on. The best way for me to explain this, in my view, is to use an analogy. Remember about 20 years ago when we had the first usable internet with the World Wide Web, right? I got online in 1994. Most people got online in 1996, 98 with Netscape browsers and so on. At the time, there was a big push for intranets. Do you guys remember that? Yeah. Intranet, the word was on all magazine covers and so on. That was the biggest holy grail. But if you think about it, it was a false dream because intranets are useless unless they're connected to the internet. Right now, 20 years later, look back. Which intranet did you have, or were you working on, or that you were involved in through a company that was not connected to the internet? Right, I would say none, because any intranet that is siloed reminds me of the Novell NetWare computers back in the 1980s, if you're old enough to remember that. So those were what we would call LANs, local area networks. You know, networking is great. It came out of the 70s and 80s, but up until the 80s, it was all local area network, intranets, right? So that's the same thing with private blockchain. Any private blockchain that is not anchored and not connected to the public Bitcoin blockchain, which I call the big one, if it's not connected, then it's useless because it might as well be a private database or might as well be a shared database. So that's my perspective. I'm not afraid to be controversial or to challenge the conventional wisdom. But essentially, a lot of you guys are in the industry. We're looking at, okay, private blockchains or just blockchains in general. And my key insight for you is you really have to think hard that the blockchain that you work on, whether it's private or public, it really has to be connected to the bigger one out there called the Bitcoin blockchain. If it's not connected, I really ask you, what is the value add you're bringing?
I guess I have a question for you.
Please.
So how do you move a very restricted, regulated, highly controlled environment that we see today
Yes.
in financial services, in healthcare, in a lot of different verticals within the industry? How do you move that, and how do you get trillions of dollars worth of assets and people and organizations to trust I see you're referring to Bitcoin as a protocol, which is, to me, the how, right? Not necessarily the what.
Yeah, what's the question? How to move it to the...
So how do you get all of these organizations to trust an open, ungoverned, completely,
You mean how to move it to Bitcoin
how do
blockchain?
you,
Is that what you're asking?
move one environment to the other?
Okay, so my question for your question is, who wanted to do that?
Right, I was just going to
Like,
say
who-
that.
who-
I'm like,
that
it's
was not
it's
the
probably
mandate.
not for them.
That was not the mandate.
Okay, that's a very, very important admission, right?
Well, hold on a second. So maybe your personal mission, but it certainly wasn't my mission. It's not the
No,
mission of...
his admission. Admission, not mission.
Admission,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So
Big
the way I see it is, whatever works, whatever gets adopted, gets adopted. It's like forcing the whole world. Remember 20 or 15 years ago with the music revolution, iPods, MP3s, and now we have streaming music. No one's forcing the world to throw out and destroy and burn their cassette tapes and LPs, right? Like it's like some people choose to listen to music digitally on MP3 files. Some people choose to use the radio or choose to have a cassette player or CD, right? So the existing financial institutions, all that stuff that's highly regulated, that you're the expert, I'm not the expert, but no one's forcing that to move to blockchain or Bitcoin.
Right.
I think the media created a frenzy and some urgencies. Oh, you guys have to move to blockchain because otherwise, And I don't think that's the case.
Well, there's also money to be made, right? If you can come up with the solution,
Yes.
and you're finding investors that will, give you money to
try
create
it,
this solution, you will try and create this solution. It's just that Bobby and I have this opinion that we don't think it's going to work.
Yeah.
So, if let's say 20 banks get together and they decide that they're going to use R3 to move syndicated loans through their platform,
That works great. That works great.
Trillions,
They will build-
That works great. That's like the airline miles on United and Star Alliance. They just keep doing that.
But-
Have you heard of Star Alliance, the airline, United Airlines, Continental? So they share miles. They allow people to redeem and fly flights across Star Alliance. That's fine. They don't bother calling it blockchain.
Right.
They could.
Are we talking about semantics here? That's the question.
But I don't know.
No, it goes back to your definition of what a blockchain is.
And that is?
Well, for me, it's the proof of work algorithm.
Okay.
But for some people, it's a database with multiple admins. It depends on which side of the spectrum you are, or somewhere in between.
Yeah. So if you think blockchain is
Proof of work is the only acceptable
Well, to
way
me, that's
to...
to me, that's what a blockchain is.
Yeah. So
Okay.
let me add to that. So proof of work can be quite complex. It's not the normal words we use in the language. But essentially, think of what Tony is saying as a blockchain is decentralized. It's kind of like no man's record of truth. Today, any sort of record of truth has some entity behind it. So my driver's license. Why is my name Bobby Lee? How do I prove that I am Bobby Lee? I have a driver's license from some state, and it's issued by the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles of that state. So that agency, that government agency, is a source of truth for who has what driver's license and what's their name. Same with the U.S. passport. As a U.S. citizen, I get a passport. That's a Department of State. Right? So the question is, for my airline miles, who tells me how many United Airlines mileage plus miles do I currently have, and how do I accrue, how do I redeem? Well, the company United Airlines does that, and no one else is in the position to do that. Same with hotel reward points, Marriott or Hilton hotels. So the question for you, for the R3, the consortium, if they want to move funds across the banks, that's fine, whether it's a SWIFT network or the R3 network, right? If you want to call it blockchain, fine, you can call it blockchain. But that's not, to my mind, that's not blockchain to me.
Okay, well, those are some really great points. I want to give everybody a really important little piece of information. So there's a lot of terms, and some of us know all the terms, some of us don't. I found this fantastic website, but please don't go to it now. But I'll still tell you. It's called www.blockchaintechnologies.com. And it has a glossary, all these terms. So later when you're like distributed ledger, what's the definition of blockchain? And by the way, in preparation, I once again looked up what's the definition of blockchain. And between Wall Street Journal and Wired and Wikipedia, every definition was a little bit different. So if you're not exactly sure, you're probably right with what you think blockchain is, and it's probably a bit more. So I want to thank the panel, but before they go, does anyone have any burning questions for our very passionate panel today? We've got a microphone right there.
Sure.
And just tell us who you are.
Hi,
And
my name is Amit Chopra. I work for a technology firm, services firm, Senecron. And we are also developing solutions on blockchain. Okay. Question. What are your thoughts on proof of stake vis-a-vis proof of work? Do you consider that as part of or evolving the next step of blockchain? Second, in terms of scalability, how scalable do you think the current blockchain network is in terms of the number of transactions that it can process?
okay, and before we answer, I'm going to ask everyone to condense their thoughts a little so we can stay on track. But love to have you answer.
Jump on that one real quick. To me, proof of stake is just complete nonsense. I don't even want to call it a database. That's what to me, it's just complete nonsense. To your other question about scalability, we'll get there. I believe that the smartest people in the space are at Blockstream, the Bitcoin core developers. I think they literally are some of the brightest programmers, and they will get there. I also don't see a big problem right now with, yes, I know 3-4 transactions a second is kind of bad, but when you're talking specifically, Bitcoin has a purpose, and to me that purpose right now, it's the only digital means of permissionless value transfer. So if you're buying that cup of coffee and you have a credit card and you have cash in your pocket, that's probably a better way to do it than using Bitcoin. So I'm personally not really in a rush to get like this giant mass adoption for day-to-day things. It probably shouldn't be right on the protocol anyway. They will come up with a side chain solution that can handle millions of transactions a second. Just give the smartest people some time.
Yeah. So I agree with Tony. I agree with everything you said.
So there is no real practical application in terms of mass adoption?
No, I disagree there. The most practical use case for blockchain today is Bitcoin. This may be bad news for some of you because some of you might dislike or hate Bitcoin. But the reality is Bitcoin is truly new in the sense that for the first time in the world, in human history, we now have an asset class that is not only digital, right? Digital allows you to do a lot of things faster, better, cheaper, but it's also decentralized, meaning now I can have these assets I could give to anyone in the world, like teletransportation, or teleportation rather.
And Bobby, we're going to get your final thoughts.
Yeah,
We're running over.
teleportation without a third party. That's never done before.
Maybe we can get a counter view on proof of stake.
You looking at me?
Oh, it sounds like I see Jerry over here. Would you like to offer a view?
Very good question. So I think, and to your point, yes, Bitcoin was the first proof of concept. And I think confining our thinking in terms of the current incantation of blockchain. I've been describing it for the last 3 years. When you say blockchain, it is a set of architectural principles, okay?
Plus
so
one.
I think proof of stake and side chains, et cetera, I think the way that market structure will metastasize within the next 5 to 10 years will look nothing like the Bitcoin blockchain.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Okay, and
I think it's too early. It's too early. The use cases will drive, the use cases, the audience,
Yep.
the governance requirements will all drive a million different varieties.
Okay, and thank you very much. Well, here's some fantastic news. All the panelists are going to be around all day. If you had a little slow drive on your morning commute, you are awake now. So we're going to bring you a lot of more speakers. Again, that website was blockchaintechnologies.com. Just a lot of information for you. And I want to thank all of our very passionate panelists this morning.
Robin.